Today on Radical Personal Finance, it's live Q&A. Welcome to Radical Personal Finance, a show dedicated to providing you with the knowledge, skills, insight, and encouragement you need to live a rich and meaningful life now while building a plan for financial freedom in 10 years or less. My name is Josh Sheets. I'm your host. Today on the podcast, I'm going to do a live Q&A. It's been several weeks since we've had these. Remember that if you would like to join me for one of these shows where you talk about anything you want, you raise any questions, you discuss any topic that you want, patreon.com/Radical Personal Finance to join these shows. Try to do these every Friday whenever I can arrange the appropriate recording technology, the appropriate microphone, etc. So patreon.com/Radical Personal Finance. I meter the shows based upon Patreon support because that allows me to have an hour, 2 hours instead of 5 or 6 hours if I let them out to everyone. We go now. Brent, welcome to the show. How can I serve you today, sir?
Hey, Joshua. Pleasure to be on the call. I'm glad I was able to get through.
Absolutely.
So question for today was about children and how many. So I think you have a lot of experience in this realm, having a big family and coming from a big family. So my wife and I have 6 kids, and the 7th is on the way in September. And it wasn't until we had our 6th kid, I think, that we even really felt the stretch and thought, boy, this is getting kind of like a lot of kids. I know some people feel that a lot earlier. But we have strong Christian theological convictions about being open to life and letting that be a decision for God. But we aren't Catholic. We're evangelical Protestant, more of a Reformed flavor of that. And so we don't really have a strong conviction necessarily against the non-abortion types of birth control necessarily. But we've never really felt comfortable with that, seeing all the scriptures about children being a blessing. So we wondered if you've maybe thought through any of this, being that you also are getting to be what society would consider a large number of kids. So how do you think through this? Have you thought about it? And how would you recommend someone think through this issue if you start getting to what might be a not a financially unwieldy number, because that's not the problem. It isn't like we can't afford more children, but some of the logistics become different, more challenging in some ways, although we've grown kind of one by one and our capacity has increased every time. So I assume we could continue doing that, but I'm not sure if there's a reason to stop at a certain point. Like, am I being selfish at a certain point when I get more children? How do you think through these issues?
Yeah, we're dealing with one of the questions that I consider the thorniest and most challenging to discuss through, and especially in any form of public forum. So I will answer forthrightly because I believe that we should talk about these things. But I think there's a whole lot of aspects of this that are best not discussed publicly, but really just discussed privately because they're sensitive and they're personal, etc. So with regard to like feeling the stretch, yeah, I would say that everything you said resonates with me. This most recent baby, our 6th baby, has definitely been very different in our family than the previous ones did. My life everything was kind of moving along well. Everything was under control. Babies would come in and they disrupt it for a while, but usually 3 to 6 months, I can kind of square things away again, etc. Over the last 6 months to a year of my life, everything has really exploded, and it's just like boom, everything became super intense. So I have been hustling to tame everything, get everything back in order, and made progress, but it's been slower than I thought. And so I think that is a clue that you should pay a lot of attention to. And so if things are not adjusting, if things don't adapt, I think that's a clue that people should pay attention to. I have a great level of respect for people who are just hardcore committed, what I guess we could call pronatalists that will take as many children as possible. I have respect for those persons. I don't say that they're wrong. I respect that position. I really do. However, I think that that position can frequently open up problems and really is inadvisable for many people. So I think it's better to be thoughtful and careful and to pay attention to what's working. If you had a life that introducing more children into was clearly a negative thing, maybe something obvious like health, right? You're married to a woman who is very sick, or you are very sick, and you are running the risk of deeply harming her or deeply harming your other children or something like that, then I think a man and a woman need to pay very careful attention to that. And I don't generally see that God is honored by kind of just being hardcore committed to just having as many children as possible, because you don't know self-control
Mm-hmm.
and you have no way to do it. One of the family that I grew up with myself, where this was a family that was just committed to having lots of babies, and basically they just liked sex and didn't think about anything, didn't plan for anything. They were they were Christians, or they identified as Christians. But then after having 6 children, the husband committed adultery against the wife. They wound up divorced. The whole family fell apart. It was just an absolute nightmare and an absolute disaster. So I can't look at while I look at the children, and I think that all children deserve to be clearly considered to be blessings, and all children should be cared for, and and no child should be rejected, no child should be killed, no child should be rejected. But I don't see how that particular family was well off because of having many children. And it just seems like there was no thoughtfulness, there was no carefulness, there was no respect for life. Now, I'm aware of the fact that that's basically how life has always been throughout history, that basically throughout history, men and women, you sleep with your wife and you have babies, and that's pretty much how it was throughout history. And that's why historically we had high birth rates. But in today's world, I think that discussing this and dealing with it straightforwardly is appropriate to pay attention to. My speaking generally, as far as I've ever gone with regard to having children, I basically would publicly say that kind of get to the point where you have where you're not sure. So if a couple comes to me and says, Joshua, we know we have one child or we have 2 children, and we are absolutely sure that we don't want any more children. I myself don't try to persuade them of some, to say, well, no, you need to have 4. But if somebody comes to me and says, we have 2 children and we're not really sure if we'd like to have more, I just say, have 1 more, right? You'll know when you're at that point. And I have known people who've had 3 children, and they have known, no, we need to stop having children. I've known people who had 6 children, and they have known we need to stop having children. I've known people with more. So I don't affirm kind of just an absolute hardcore, we're going to have as many children as possible. I think that if you're in that situation, you should be paying careful attention, and you should be interacting with others to basically get an idea. Is this going well? Is this situation working? Are we doing what we should be doing? Are we responsible parents? I think that some people can handle 10 children, absolutely responsible. I think that some people are going to struggle with 3. And I really care about responsibility. Now, I believe a lot of people can learn. And so that couple that starts off with 3 and they're really struggling, I think they can impose order, discipline on the family. The father can do his job. The mother can do her job. I think they can grow. But we all have different ability. We all have different financial aptitude. We all have different ability. And most of us these days are so isolated that it's really not a good way to handle it. And by the way, I would point out that this is one of the things that has become really hard, is that it used to be that we lived in a more of a communitarian lifestyle. If you were in a local village and you had children and birth control didn't exist, then basically the village was available to help you raise your children, right? Hillary Clinton was right about that. It does take a village to raise a child, and the village was available to you. The expectations of what it meant to be a good parent were simpler, right? You tried to give your children some food whenever you had it. You tried to keep everyone alive. You did your best with it. And the opportunities for children were much simpler, right? Children could go out the door. They could play. There wasn't all that much that was expected of it. In our current world, what we have done is we have dramatically increased the expectations of what it means to be a good parent, and we have dramatically reduced the resources available to people who would otherwise be good parents. And so if we go back to just, a middle of the road, not a high capacity couple, but a middle or low capacity couple that are good, honest people, they work a job, something's available, but you start all of a sudden having tons and tons of children, there's just not, generally in most of our communities, there's just not much help for those people. So I would like to see that change, right? I would love to see it so that we could build villages and communities once again where we had options for those people, but at the moment we don't, and so it's it's difficult. Anyway, a lot of words to say that I agree with you that we should pay attention to it, and we should be very careful in what we're doing. Now, the other side of it, I would say, is can we solve the problems? And so if you are a high capacity man and your wife is a high capacity woman and you're generally healthy, you have the money, you're generally doing well, is it not a set of problems that can be solved that kind of relate to things? And so for example, in my life, one of the problems in my life with my children right now is that I'm essentially alone and I have not figured out how to build better help in the house so that my wife is freed. And our load right now is so heavy where I'm running multiple businesses, I'm homeschooling the children, we have minimal outside help because we're thrust into a community that we're not established in at the moment. And so that load is so heavy that I have to solve this in some way. And so in the past, I have solved it myself by taking much more work off of my wife's shoulders. But what I haven't done is I haven't brought other people into the household. And I think that is the proper solution. So at family camp this year, I have 2 presentations scheduled. Well, I have multiple, but I solicited 2 ladies that who are going to give a presentation on basically having a larger household. So one of them is using family-based hospitality to basically double or triple up with other families. And so the question is, can you find people in your community who need support, and can you basically absorb those people into your family? If I could find other people in my life right now, then that seemed like a good fit for our family, I would expand our household by making commitments to those older people in exchange for them helping and serving in my household. Now, that's difficult based upon the way that most of us as Americans live. We want to be left alone. We want to have our isolated unit, etc. So that's why I commissioned one presentation by a lady who has this. So she has 7 young children, but she also has in her household, she has a family of teens and early 20s, so a couple young ladies and a couple young men who, if I understand correctly, their parents died, and basically they have adopted each other as a family. And so she has, in her household, she has these young 20s girls that live with them, work with them, and consistently work together to solve the problem. So she's not all alone. And I think that this is a model that we really need to pay attention to. Just this week, I've been reading a book called Tom Brown. I think it's called Tom Brown's School Days to My Children. And it's an old book written 150 years ago about a British little boy named Tom Brown. And in this book, Tom is the son of the squire of the village. But it's really interesting that the squire's wife, who is in many ways the matron of the village, she has various children. But one of the things that she does in her household is she is continually, I'm going to use the word adopting. I don't mean that legally, but she is bringing into her household young, poor girls who come in, work for her. She trains them up to be a lady's maid or to be something in the household. And then she sends them off to another household as fully trained. And what I see in this story is basically kind of the beautiful and noble working out of aristocracy, or at least some form of nobility, in a previous version of English society. So she is doing multiple things simultaneously. First, she is receiving the care that her home needs by hiring the maids, the young ladies of the village, to come in and work for her as maids, work for her as nannies, governess for the children. But she is training those young women in the skills that they will need. So she brings them in, she supports them, they work for her, they provide her a useful service. Then, after a couple of years of working for her, because she's very patient, she helps them to get placed into another great house somewhere where they're able to engage in employment and they are well trained. So they're able to earn a living, to support their own family, their own children, etc. And I would say that that is, I think, one of the responsibilities that people like you should consider, right? If you are a high capacity man and your wife is a high capacity woman, there may be people in your community who are available to you that if you brought them into your home, you could have a dramatic impact on their life by helping them, and they could help you. So that would be the first model. The second model is that of the hired servant model. And so this is the second talk that I have commissioned for Family Camp this year, which is going to be about working with hired staff. And this has been a friction point in my own life because I have hired people into my home and my wife does not enjoy that. She doesn't like having people in the house. And she's never learned how to work well with people in the house. So I thought, here, I'm doing these great things for my wife. She doesn't like it. But this is also a cultural thing, right? If you were Indian, the idea of not having, if you were an Indian of means of any kind, the idea of not having servants would be unthinkable to you. But yet, as Americans, we're not accustomed to having servants in the household. So I have another mother who will be giving a presentation, and she has 2 full-time nannies that work for her with her children. She has a third au pair coming on staff. They've got a full-time cook and a full-time housekeeper in their household. And the question is, how do you grow into that? And this is the other thing, is that I commissioned this talk from her about how did you grow into this? How did you learn these skills? And so now she seems to be doing very well because she has a large household staff that's working for her, and she has 4 children and is thriving because of this. So what I would say to you is the same thing I say to me as a husband, is to say that this is not, if things are not going well, it may be a solvable problem. And it may be a solvable problem in a number of ways. You may do something like abandon homeschooling. That's something that I am seriously looking at right now to try to improve the functioning of the household. Is there an institution that will serve me and my family well, serve my children well, provide us with what we're looking for, and change the nature of those things? You may need to find people to come in. And so can you bring in a nanny? Can you bring in somebody? Can you do it in the context of a relationship? Do you pay somebody a salary? There are multiple ways to do that, but can you bring these things in? And I think spending money on this is a smart and wise thing. If you have money, if you are not broke, what I tell men privately all the time is spending money on your household so that if you desire to have another child, that you can have another child, will be an investment that is well worth it. And I think most people reach a time where we say, that's enough children. But if you recognize that I'm not convinced to be there yet, and there's a way to spend money to kind of smooth things out, to make sure that your wife has what she needs, that you have what you need as a husband and father, that's money that should be spent even when it costs other aspects of life.
Fascinating. Well, yeah, many very interesting points that you just raised, and some of those I thought about or tried in different ways, and some of them I had not really thought about much at all. There are a few people I've spoken to at church, for example, who seem to be doing what you presented as sort of option one, which is bringing in younger people into their house and receiving some sort of help, and in return, the people are watching a functional family interact. They're getting some level of mentorship and some kind of mutually beneficial arrangement. So I had thought about that one. Haven't tried that one yet. We have tried hiring people at different times to do things like cleaning, and had varying levels of success with that. I understand that's certainly a skill set to manage and find good people for that. I found that to be challenging. My wife, interestingly, you said your wife didn't enjoy having someone in the house. My wife didn't think she would like it in the beginning. And then after a few months of having someone come in to help clean, she was more than open to it.
Right.
So sometimes you don't know what you are missing, I suppose. But yeah, we also are homeschooling, and made the decision for this next fall to send all the two children into a classical private school instead, and try that option out. And it's for some of these same reasons that you're alluding to, which is to lighten the load of the household, lighten the homeschooling load in this case, because it does become more challenging to teach the older kids. It just requires a greater mastering interaction from the parents, at least as far as I've been involved to see it so far. I'm sure there are other ways to do it. So, no, there's good things to consider. I'm actually coming to family camp, so I look forward to my wife and I seeing those talks, hopefully.
Well, if you're coming, then thank you for pitching it up. I think I have one room left for for anybody who wants a last minute ticket, and we will have a lot to talk about, because these are not unsolvable problems. They are common to all of us, and then that would give us a chance, I think, there to speak on the in an appropriate way on the more intimate details of theology, etc. And because that's ultimately, I think, the question that you're asking. I guess the one thing I would like to say to leave a clear sound on that is, I believe that this is very much an area of Christian conscience, and is very much something that is reserved for the husband and wife in the privacy of their relationship. I don't think this is appropriate for outside meddling. I'm not denying the need to discuss the theology of it, the need to discuss the theology of various forms of birth control, theology of abortion, theology of those types of things. But I have never seen anything good happen from I just think it's an area that the husband and wife are going to bear the load. They're the ones who know what their relationship can handle. They have to do it before God. And so I try to provide kind of outlines of discussions, but I would never want to meddle in the privacy of another family's relationship. I think that in general, just having the positive idea that children are a blessing, a man who has many children is a wealthy man. A woman who has many children is a wealthy woman. That goes such a long way towards the health of our society, that we don't need to go all the way to an unwarranted end to say that the goal of life is to have as many children as possible.
Well, I look forward to discussing it further, but thank you for your answers today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brent. All right, move on to Chris. Chris, welcome to the show. How can I serve you today?
Hi, Joshua. Thanks for taking my call.
My pleasure.
Before I ask my question, I just want to let you know I've really appreciated the pivot you've seemed to make on some of your recent shows, leaning in toward family, legacy, culture, charity, those type of topics. I've found it very interesting and insightful.
Thank you. It is. I have a hard time talking about things that I'm not engaged with. And most of my thinking these days is on these topics, probably just a natural growth and me as a man, getting older, thinking about these questions that I have more context for. So it's hard. It's very difficult to talk in the first place, to create content, to create podcasts. It's a lot of hard work. So you got to have some engagement with the topic to make it worth it.
And then to lean into my question, I'm curious if you have ever put any thought into designing a physical estate more of a family seat and like an actual house structure, not the paperwork involved, but creating kind of a country house for Joshua and your family.
I have absolutely spent many hours thinking about it. What do you want to ask me about it?
Well, I find myself in a situation where that's what my wife and I are looking at doing now. We have land that we're going to be developing and hopefully building a house on in the next year or so. And I'm curious if you have any ideas or things that you might integrate or incorporate that are different than, your typical builder suggestions.
Yeah. So let's start. Thank you. I have spent a lot of time thinking about it. I would not, if you were not asking me the question, I would not propound on this subject because I think I'm in the beginning stages of it. But I have the glimmer of a dream. I have the glimmer of a plan, and I'll share with you some of the outlines of that. To begin with, the biggest change for me that has happened in my thinking, my personal ideology over the years, is I have come to appreciate the importance of the physical buildings, the importance of physical culture. When I was growing up, I had kind of two basic ideas that nobody taught these to me. They're just ideas that I absorb. So the first idea that I had was what I characterize as a broadly kind of Protestant theological conviction that people are more important than structures. And so it's fairly common for Protestant Christians to dismiss the value of a huge cathedral, to minimize the need for a big giant cathedral, a very expensive thing, and to basically say, well, just imagine what could have happened if this money had been given to the poor instead. So that was my natural attitude when I was younger, which again it wasn't my parents, it wasn't any sermon that was preached to me. It was just kind of a general attitude that I absorbed based upon looking at things, saying the people are more important than the building. Today, I would reject that. It's not that I don't still have inclinations, kind of just standard cultural inclinations. So, Protestants, evangelicals have a tendency towards plainness, simplicity. I'm not necessarily culturally aligned with the ornate, ostentatious decorating style. I'm probably more Shaker and Quaker than anything else in terms of just my appreciation for simplistic aesthetics. But I respect and understand now the value of having a physical monument. And so having a physical monument at the center of a town, having a Gothic cathedral, having a beautiful town hall, having these physical things is really, really important. I started looking at the top of the monument that's at the top of, I think it's Tbilisi in Georgia, of like the story of the Georgians. And over the years, I've come to recognize the significance of having, again, say a Gothic cathedral at the center of your town. The second thing is that being an American, in America, land is cheap. And it has always been cheap, and labor is expensive. And so the American tendency is not to build for permanence, but rather to build for cheap opulence at the moment. So that's where we get the idea of the McMansion, right? Have a huge house that's made actually relatively cheaply. It may last a century, but it's probably unlikely to last for a longer period of time. And that's because our culture is relatively young, right? The American project is 400 years old as a culture, and throughout that entire time, we've been a frontier-oriented people. That the basic way that we've handled our intergenerational succession has been to kick everyone out and send everyone on to the next space. So our natural model, this is why, the natural model is we need people to go and settle the frontier. So as an American, you need to go and move on to the next place. Now, if you go into a different context, As Americans, we're probably most connected to Europeans. And so if you go into a European context and you look at it differently, and you go around the nation of England, which has been settled for thousands of years, if you go around France, if you go around some long-lived civilization, you see that they've dealt with a totally different set of problems. And Europeans often hold their wealth in physical form. And that physical form, the physical bricks, provides a feeling, a sense that you get when you're in a little town in Austria or in some downtown region of, the Roman Baths in Bath, England. This is a different feeling that you have as a culture because you're surrounded by this sense of permanence. And it's wildly different from the American approach and the American culture. So I say that to just basically point out that in order to think about things like a family seat, you have to go and learn from other long-lived peoples. And if you're a frontiersman, you don't build a family seat because you know that we're just going to send the next generation to the West to go settle the West. But I think that we're basically at the point in American culture where we have settled the West and now we have to fill it in. And our country is dramatically underpopulated, but in the fullness of time, there's not necessarily new horizons yet. And so we're going to start filling in the coming centuries. We're going to be filling in the nation. And so that's when you start thinking about something like a family seat. So what inspires me is to say, where can my family have a family seat? And how can I build a sense of identity that goes beyond the model of just send your children out to the frontier, but rather to say, this is the home base. This is where our community is. And so I have a deep interest in kind of long-lasting architecture. I've drawn out what sorry, one more thing. You have to get past also just in your wealth, you have to get past the stage of good enough. You have to get to the point where you can say, I'm going to overspend by 50% to build a building that is not going to fall down in a century, but that may last for 400 or 500 years. That's going to cost money. It's going to be extravagant. It's going to be different. But I'm drawn to that. And I have come to be convicted of this. I actually do have a show planned for this, but I have come to be convicted that this is the duty of a wealthy man, is that a wealthy man should leave things in his community, should build things that are visible. One of my frustrations right now with our tech overlords is that they kind of reflect our culture, and not in a good way. They reflect the ephemerality, and they're not spending their money on productive things. If you were you were the squire of a village back in England, you knew it is my responsibility to make sure that our village has the buildings that it needs. And so I think, so I didn't grow up with thinking of that in that way, but now I think that if I'm going to be a wealthy man, I need to take responsibility for a portion of the earth. I need to take responsibility for a town. And so what this town needs to have beautiful civic buildings. This town needs to be there. And that was always known. If you go and you find a great company, a great founder who really took responsibility for his town, you saw that worked out. And you see that there are people who are in charge of a place. And when the founder of this company is there, it's his job to make sure that the town is beautiful. So that the family seat should not only be a house, it should also be the town hall, the county courthouse, the civic buildings, the infrastructure. It should also be the bike lanes and the landscaping and the decorating and all of that stuff. Those are all expressions of this for a wealthy family. And then so there's a personal and a civic aspect of it that I think we should start to embrace and we should start to think about. So in terms of my vision for a family seat, the first question is, where is that place? And so I used to think that place was not all that important, that you could come and go, and you could go wherever you're treated best and go and find the different things. But I now believe that place is more important than I previously understood it to be, and that I want to give my children a sense of identity with a place. We are corporeal beings, and we need to engage in in a place. And so if you can be in any place, the question is what place fits you? And you should think about what culture fits us, what place fits us, what's the best future for you and for your people. Who are your people and where are they? And can you get close to them and can you work with them? And so you want to think about the place. I think that there's a place for multiple places as part of your family culture. So one of my favorite books on this, on kind of family wealth, I've long recommended William and Bill Bonner's book called Family Fortunes. And the Bonner family, the founders of the Agora publishing empire, they have three basic places that are part of their family seats, where they have family seats. They have an old castle in France where they lived for many years, and that's part of their culture. They have a place in Baltimore. Baltimore is where they have been for many years, is like a city-based place. They have also a country home, I presume in Virginia or someplace out in the country. And they have a ranch in Argentina. And those are the things that they talk about publicly. So, but when I think about that and I imagine, okay, let's presume that I'm wealthy and I have these family kind of installations. Wouldn't that be amazing? Because if you're the patriarch of a great family, you have your city-based place where you do commerce, is where our businesses are. You have your country retreat. And so if your 24-year-old son is going through a personal breakdown in his life and he's left his job and he needs 6 months in the country, you send him out to your family farm and he goes out there and recovers and enjoys the country lifestyle. And then you have your international backups. And so you have your French version and your Argentinian ranch. And you think about kind of being a family that survives. You have the ability to go from one region to the next, one country to the next, one culture to the next, a few languages like that. That's a really compelling, persuasive vision to me. And then even those properties would have different dimensions. Now, I'm not as rich as Bill Bonner. Maybe someday I would hope to be, but he's got a big head start on me. But what I've observed, and I've reflected, and I've talked to people about this, you can do a similar thing in your own family. And the reason I'm inserting this is you have the question of how much should we put into one place versus multiple places. And so I have given the advice to people that you should basically think about what are the needs of your family and what does your family actually need. So you need a place that is going to be the center of your family, but then you're going to need a place to send your children to and your family members to at different times. And so you might have, so looking at your context, you would say, is there a center of business power where our family needs a spot? Is there a center of government power where our family should have a representation? And is there some other kind of cultural benefit, cultural vision that you would like to have? And so I think that there are families who will have just kind of a more normal place in a state, but then who will maintain an apartment in New York City, an apartment in Washington, D.C., or an apartment in London, an apartment in Shanghai, whatever is appropriate to their family, is you're going to start to build a little bit of infrastructure. And I think that these things are accessible even at a younger age. One of my dreams is that at some point in time when my children are teens, I'm going to send them to Washington, D.C. for the summer, and I'm going to tell them, your job is to know this city and all of its cultural offerings inside and out. And so I'd like to have an apartment in Washington, D.C. that's kind of our family property. Whenever we go to D.C., we're there, and I can send my children there, and I could say, you need to go to every museum in the city, and that's your job, and I need you to understand what's available here. And so real estate can often be an equipper of that, a way to facilitate that. I had a client of mine, who I recommended this to in Rome. This family really enjoyed Italy. They didn't want to relocate to Italy, but I said, why don't you get a small apartment in Italy and keep that as part of your family identity. And that way you can send your teens or your college-age children. You can send them whenever they want to go. You just send them to Rome. They stay at your place. They travel around Europe. That's part of your family identity, even if it's a modest apartment. And what I have found is that by starting the conversation with multiple properties, that actually solves some problems that aren't otherwise solved and allows you to think about things. So I can't afford eat comfortably to go and set up an estate in Manhattan, right? That's not me. I don't have the money for it. The wealth level would be enormously different. but I could afford to set up a small apartment in Manhattan. And so if I had ties to Manhattan and I just kept a small apartment there for my large family, basically I could have a glorified hotel room in a place, and that provides me with options. And so you might have your family seat is a rural ranch, but then you maintain an apartment in the big city where, yes, it's not large. It can't accommodate your entire family as a full-time place, but it allows you to have ties in that place. So we should start by thinking about like how many houses do we need, and then where should those houses be? Now, presuming that you are deeply engaged in one place, then the goal should be to establish a legacy property in that place that will be passed down through the generations. And so when I think about this, the image that's in my head is some form of, I call it brick because I love there's this account that I follow on X called the 1,000-Year House, where it's basically a bricklayer and they're kind of just really trying to bring back true structural brick. I love that. I think that's so beautiful. I think a stone house, some stone house with a slate roof is some version of what you're looking for. Not gypsum drywall walls that are going to be gone in 15 years, but some enduring permanence. And then I think a lot about a brick. I think a lot about stone. I think a lot about slate or copper on the roof, things that are expensive, but yet endure. There are modern versions of this. There's a Boston builder that I watch who they just built this custom home, and he had this really interesting approach where he built a wooden frame, and then he had floating concrete, basically like floating concrete tiles, but with hooks on them that covered the wall. And so you have a perfect waterproof coating of the house, but then the whole thing is breathable, and just this really innovative modern technology on building a home that will last for a long time. I love the Japanese. If you go and you study Japanese architecture and you see what they've been able to do over the years with wood and just this incredible skill of building for the long term is appropriate. And so I think that having a family home that is significant, that is a bit ostentatious, that is large, that has capacity for a lot of people is really ideal. Now, where would that be? Well, it's going to be different if you're on Palm Beach in terms of your capacity for space than if you're in rural Virginia. So if you are in a rural space, I think that thinking about if you have the physical geography, then I think considering how you can have space for multiple generations is really intelligent. One of the best things that my parents did was when my grandparents were getting older, they moved my grandparents across the country so that they could live next to them. My dad set up at a certain time 2 houses next to each other with just rental houses so that my grandparents could be close. But his family was too large for the housing that he could find, and so he had to build a house. And so he built a house that wasn't brick mansion, but it was a large house, and he put an apartment into that house with a live-in apartment that worked really well for my grandparents. So for the last 10 years of their life, they stayed with us. We cared for them. We were deeply integrated as a family, and that was really, really powerful. So I think so if you had to give up brick in order to gain large house where you can get multiple generations together, that goes a really long way. And then having a plan to support young people as they get started is also a really good part of it. So I don't know that I've done anything except raise some questions. I've tried to raise the question of basically valuing permanence, valuing a large estate. I think that is a responsibility of the wealthy to make beautiful things that will last and to hold those beautiful things. I've not touched on the ownership, how it should be held, but I do think that it is right to plan for that and to build large structures, and that's important. I've touched on multiple locations and basically longer term building structure. And I figure if I keep on thinking about that for the next 5 or 10 years and try to make some money, then maybe we'll be in a situation where I can establish that. But I think that these physical structures are important, are a component for as are a good background to the kind of family culture you want to build. Let me add one more story, though, which is, I think, kind of a horror story. It's not enough just to have a physical structure, and it's not enough just to have a legal plan if you aren't also going on and building other things. So I have some friends of mine who uh, who had, when I was younger, had a property that I loved. It was a lake house in the South, a beautiful lake that was just absolutely magnificent. And they had a strong set of family traditions that every single holiday they were at that lake. And the father, the patriarch of the family, had done an amazing job of outfitting the lake house with the toys, the boats, the jet skis, the stuff. They just had these deep family traditions. He was wealthy. He got cancer at a relatively young age, and he died in his mid-60s. He was a very prudent man of great foresight. And so he established, as I understand the details, he established a separate trust that was specifically capitalized to care for this house and to keep it going for the family as a centerpiece. So the children had their inheritances that were separate, but this trust was there that was supposed to be there to provide for the house. Now, I'm not privy to all the details, but I was horrified to observe that within a decade after his death, the surviving children had all agreed the house be sold, the proceeds distributed, and they lost this like center of the family community. They didn't ask me for input, not close friends, so I wasn't involved in it, but I just knew a few of the details. And I was so horrified at that because I'm like, here you are as a patriarch who has, you've seen to everything else. You've seen to all the other scenarios. You've recognized it's important. He's built it. But he did a great job on making the money, and he did a great job on even doing the legal structure for it. But what he failed at was he failed at building the family culture. He failed at building children who are friends with one another, who are committed to the family name. So I don't know how you do that very well. I have known other people who have been able to stay together. I have known other people who never had any money, but who built the family culture, and that really worked. So if we had to choose one or the other, I think the family culture is the most important thing. But the family seat, the wealth, the buildings, the houses, the estates, and all those things, I think are part of a good, broader plan. What say you, Chris?
That mirrors a lot of I guess our own thinking as well, as far as the cautions of the family culture and the intentionality required behind that. You also touched on the location. That was something we struggled with for quite a while, and the importance of that. But if you ever do get around to finishing your thoughts and putting it into a podcast like you have been thinking, I look forward to hearing when you do that.
Well, thank you. It's hard. I try to talk about things that I know about and not things I don't know about. And I don't know if I'm going to, I will share I'll share them as dreams or ideas and whatnot. I never hold back, but I don't know that I will be able to discuss this subject for, perhaps 20 or 30 years. But I believe that that these things do matter. I believe that it is important. And that's why I led with basically, I think it's important to have big, beautiful buildings that are going to last. I believe that that's an important legacy that I think the tech bros that just don't want to engage in a place are wrong. And I believe that we should emphasize that. But we're in a period of time where to do that requires us to pay attention to issues of politics, issues of governance, things like that. Because I think right now, where I think a lot of us are facing is there's so much turmoil in our communities that we have a hard time believing that our communities are going to look the way they are, a couple centuries from now. And so there are some exceptions, but in order to have those exceptions, you basically have to have you have some version of a politically dominant family. I was recently talking I've never been to Bentonville, Arkansas, right? But as I understand it, of course, you have the Walton family that controls Bentonville, Arkansas. And what has happened, the reason this is very difficult to us in the United States is that we have an ethos of democracy. We have this idea that democracy is a good thing, but we're not willing to go the next step and recognize where democracy is destructive. So we're not willing to actually give a title of nobility to the Walton family to say, yes, you are in charge of Bentonville, Arkansas. Here's the dukedom of Bentonville. You are responsible for it. We want to maintain the fiction because it pleases us. We want to maintain the fiction that, well, the Waltons are just the same as everyone else, and the law applies to everyone equally, which is, of course, nonsense, but we don't want to acknowledge that it's nonsense. And so we're stuck right now in this very difficult scenario where if you do not give special political privilege to wealthy people, they're not going to maintain it. And so if you don't say to someone, this is your place, right? Elon Musk, Starbase, Texas, this is your town. You have full and complete control over it. And you somehow believe that Elon Musk is supposed to be accountable to, a democratically elected board of commissioners. This is really harming us right now. And so I don't know the solution to this, meaning that we're going through a huge turmoil right now. But I think some of these problems that we're pointing out are the problems of democracy. So other cultures have had problems of monarchism, had problems of nobility, and they have solved some of those problems and they have failed at some of those problems. We are having problems of democracy. And the fact that, and you see, even with the Supreme Court case this week, the arguments being brought about birth tourism, you see the demographic replacement of the native English, the native white and Black Americans now with people from all around the world who have a different tradition, different cultural traditions. We're right now experiencing enormous tension because we don't have these stable institutions. And democracy turns out to be a very unstable institution if it's not a democracy of the people around. So I don't have the answers to this, but I'm observing the problems of this is that it's difficult. It's almost certainly difficult for you and me to know where we would go and where we would invest our family's fortunes, given that we have no noble titles, right? We have no royal titles. We have no ability to control that. And that's the problem with landedness, is that landedness essentially comes with, in order for landedness to work, there has to be title, and that title has to be the kind that's respected down over time. And over the last few hundred years, we've eroded that in our culture. And so that now the most secure thing that I can offer to a wealthy person is that of an offshore bank account and an offshore trust, not a house in a certain place. I've literally preached this myself. I've talked about how real estate is the worst asset to hold because it completely subjects you to the whims of one local government. So I'm very aware of this paradox, this disagreement between what I see today and what I believe in the past. The idea of having a significant portion of your family wealth tied to the soil in one place and somehow one local judge having control over what happens in his jurisdiction is horrifying to me and has been for many years. And so when you think, and yet it's very attractive to me and has been for a number of years. So when you come back to it, there's some element where we're going to have to invent a new political system somehow that's going to solve this, or we're going to continue to have these things just destroyed from us. Just the example, right? Mayor Mamdani of New York City and his proposals to raise income taxes, that's been well known. But now his newest proposals to increase the estate taxes of New York City and to increase and to lower the exemption amount to $750,000. What intelligent advisor to a wealthy man or woman would ever advise somebody to have a home in New York City? What intelligent advisor would ever advise anybody to maintain property, to invest into the local community when you are subject to the capricious democratic whims of a first generation immigrant, a newcomer to your place that doesn't share your culture, doesn't share your ethnicity, doesn't share your background, and doesn't share your politics? What fool would ever have an estate in New York City again? And that's the problem. How do you solve that? I have no idea, but this is a tension at its core. And it's tension over democracy versus some other form of government. And what is turning out is that right now, with the political tensions in the United States and with the mass importation of people from all around the world into the United States, any wealthy family who is actually committed to a place is facing significant problems. And I think that I don't know a solution to that, but that's that's one of the core issues right now. So anyway, rant over. Go ahead, Chris. I'll give you the last word.
It's almost the tragedy of the commons when everybody owns everything, nobody owns anything.
Yeah. There's a lot that could be said about that, but there's a reason we have these terms. And so we're going to have to build some kind of new system if you want, and you're going to have to build some kind of new system. And I believe that we have reached the limits. This will sound quite controversial. We have reached the limits of democracy and discovered the problems thereof. And, I have my personal convictions, but if I could dial back democracy by, I don't know, 30% or 40%, I would really like to do that, because I believe that we're experiencing this ongoing tension over these things, and this is hollowing out anyway, I'm not prepared to give a political discourse, just that I'm pointing out that this is at the core problem. For you to commit to a place and for you to commit to your family to a place, you need to have some kind of assurance that your great-great-grandchildren are still going to be safe in that place. And in the moment, your great-great-grandchildren are much safer with an offshore trust in some tax haven, in some island somewhere, than they are with a great house in downtown New York City. And that's a real problem that you have to wrestle with. All right.
Great thoughts, Joshua. Thank you.
My pleasure. And with that, we conclude today's Q&A show. Remember, if you would like to join me on next week's Q&A, you can do that by going to patreon.com/radicalpersonalfinance, patreon.com/radicalpersonalfinance. That will gain access for you to a Friday Q&A show.